Hey, everybody. I have been thinking about the internet this week, all the good and the bad that is the internet. One of my favorite things about the internet is it has given us so much access to the lives and stories of people that we would in no other ways know. One of my favorite things about doing this podcast has been able to sit down with people that I love and respect and just listen to their stories and to record their stories and then to share their stories with you. And I've found this really joyful. Like, I love people and I find their stories to be fascinating. And so I love Kayla and her husband Paul, and I love Melanie and Ron and Dave and Denny and these people. And by the way, I've got a lot of other people that I really love, and I really want them to come and share their stories with you because they have beautiful stories. But sorry, you're just stuck again with me this week. But I love people, and I find their stories to be beautiful and fascinating and hard and broken and amazing and complicated and wonderful. And when I hear their stories and we get to share them together, it strengthens me, it teaches me, it guides me. And that's been a beautiful thing for me about this podcast adventure that we're on. And to just hear their stories and to share them. And when I hear their stories, I think, man, I'm not quite as alone as I thought I was. Or, man, God is doing something in them that I need to draw from. And I'm so grateful for this technology that allows us to experience the lives of other people who can really help us in our journeys. I think that's a beautiful thing. Before the internet, the biggest technology for this, at least in my opinion, was the printing press, which I know has been around for like 500 years, but that's really not that long as far as human history is concerned. So if you think in the last 500 years, the written word has been circulated just so much more vastly than it ever had been before in human history. So we have access to tons of people and writers and authors and thinkers for generations now, for the last 500 years. And one of those authors that I particularly love deeply is C.S. Lewis. He's one of the great Christian apologists and authors of the 20th century. And he wrote a little memoir called A Grief Observed after his wife died. Lewis died in 1963, so his wife died a few years, I think it was late 50s. And he published this book anonymously under a pseudonym because he thought it was just too personal to share under his own name. This was the era before the selfie and everybody wanting attention to themselves. So he published this deep and sorrowful and beautiful and awful and wonderful book anonymously, but then people figured out it was him. And so the book has since been attributed to him openly. But I'm so glad Lewis published it because it gives us a window into this great man's soul, this man that I love deeply, but he's a man that I only have access to because of the printing press, because his books have been widely circulated. And I've found so much strength and help in his honesty. This great man of God, this great theologian writes just heartbreakingly honestly in his book. Let me just read you a little bit from the beginning. It's very hard, it's very honest. He says this quote, "Meanwhile, where is God? This is one of the most disquieting symptoms. When you are happy, so happy that you have no sense of needing him, so happy that you are tempted to feel his claims upon you as an interruption, if you remember yourself and turn to him with gratitude and praise, you will be, or so it feels, welcomed with opened arms. But go to him when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain, and what do you find? A door slammed in your face and the sound of bolting and bolting on the inside. After that, silence. What can this mean? Why is he so present a commander in our time of prosperity and so very absent in our time of trouble?" Unquote. Here is one of the giants of the faith of the 20th century, and he is troublingly honest. That's been so helpful for me. That's from the beginning of the book. It's not the end of the book. And as you walk with Lewis through A Grief Observed, I just find it helpful as he thinks honestly and deeply about the horrible suffering he faces after the loss of his wife. And in his writing, he gives us access to his soul. And I find that so helpful. Well, books and things like these interviews on the internet can give us certain access that is so good and helpful as we try to navigate our lives as people of faith. One of my favorite people in the world is a guy by the name of Peter Kraft. He is a philosopher and teacher at Boston College. He's a prolific writer. He's published over 100 books. I've read quite a few of them, not all of them by any stretch of the imagination, but I've read quite a few. He recently turned 87 years old. And about 8 years ago, I found a bunch of his lectures and interviews online. And not only is he a wonderful thinker, and I've read a number of his books, but he is humble and good and likable. And I've listened to dozens of his lectures and interviews, and I love Peter Kraft. He has shaped how I think, how I um, understand the Christian life. I remember a few of his lectures on suffering that were so good for me to engage with after my daughter Maria died. And the internet and the printing press have given me a ton of access to this man who I really loved. So, by the way, if you're out there and you're watching this and you know Crave personally, like hook me up. Like, I would love to meet this guy. But this is one of the great beauties of the internet, but it also reveals one of the great weaknesses. Because if I told you right now, Peter Kraft is the most important man in my life. He is my best friend. He is my closest companion on this journey of grief. I think you would begin to see the problem because I've never met him. He doesn't know that I exist. Like I am a big fanboy and I've been influenced deeply by Kraft, but it's a one-way relationship, which is why books and access through the internet can be a great starting point. They can be helpful, but they're also inadequate. Books, see, are safe because I can read a book, I can draw from it, but I don't have to put anything back into the book. I can remain emotionally distant. I can draw the best from a book. I can watch an internet interview and like learn some good things. And that's a good starting point. But I don't really have to fully enter into that. When Maria died, Jill and I were given at least 20 books. I think I read maybe 2 of them because you can only read so many books in the midst of like chaos and heartbreak. But I think people give them because it's like a safe thing. Like this book helped me, maybe it'll help you. But then there's a lack of engagement at the human level. See, here's a question for you. What are the most important aspects of being human? What are the most important things that you do as a human being? There's a really good thinker who said this. The most important aspects of being human are knowing and loving. You are called to know and be known by others. You are called to love and be loved by others, to know and love God, to be known and loved by God. We are persons created for relationships. And the most important relationships are these two-way relationships. The writer, by the way, who said this is Peter Kraft. He's a good friend of mine. I don't even know him, but he's influenced me so much. I think he's absolutely right. Like the deepest thing we do is to know others and to love them and be known by them and to be loved by them. And I hope that on this podcast, in some small way, you're getting to know me and getting to know Kayla and getting to know the people that we've had on the podcast. I think that's a beautiful thing. I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good starting point. But what all of us need more than that are flesh and blood relationships. We learned this, right? One of the hardest things during COVID was that everything was virtual, which I don't think was good because healthy human relationships cannot be lived out in the anonymity and isolation of being online. You need to be seen and known in the flesh, eye to eye, body to body, voice to voice, heart to heart. See, we need to be heard and embraced by others in the flesh. The great Christian doctrine of the incarnation of Christ. Incarnation means God made flesh. We all just need this at the depths of our being to be seen, to be known, to be heard, to be loved. Jill and I have had 7 children. And if you were to tell me, hey, Tristan, you have to move to Fiji, halfway around the world by yourself for the next decade, the next 10 years. You have to leave your family behind, but don't worry. We will put up a bunch of cameras in your home and we will stream 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, filming your family constantly so that anytime you miss them, you can just tune in and watch them anytime you want. So you'll be fine in Fiji because you can watch your family anytime you miss them. Would you be satisfied with this agreement, Tristan? And my answer would be, oh no, of course not. I don't want to watch my children. I don't want to observe their lives. I want them. I want them to be in my life. I want to be really present with them in the flesh, not on a screen. I want to see them, to touch them, to embrace them, to interact with them. Because watching on the internet is never enough. Because we are embodied persons who desperately need other embodied persons. So, those of you who have suffered the loss of a loved one, you know this, right? All of your pictures and videos of the loved one that you've lost, are those good enough? Of course not. Like, pictures and videos are so precious. But for me, man, I long for my daughter. Not just pictures of her, not just videos, like the real person with me. And so if you have gone through great grief and you are following this podcast, like I really hope it's been helpful for you. I hope it's a helpful starting point. I hope it's been an encouragement, maybe something like you've gleaned from our conversations, our interviews. But I just want to say, man, we need real relationships in the flesh. Psychiatrist and author Kurt Thompson, he talks about all of our need to be a part of healing confessional communities. We need to be a part of communities where we can share what's really going on in our lives, where we can be heard and known and loved and accepted. And this is especially true for those of us who are going through suffering. Because sometimes suffering and grief just pushes us away from community. It's easy to isolate. It's easy to just avoid the world because the world is painful and it is scary to take the risk to reach out. But I want to encourage you today, if that's you, to try to take that risk. See, the hardest step you're probably going to face if you are in the midst of grief is that first step. It's that step of calling up your trusted friend and saying, I need to get together with you. I need to talk. Can you come over? Or can we meet at a coffee shop? Or maybe for you, you don't know who that person is. And so it's just taking that risk of calling a counselor and making an appointment, or reaching out to your pastor or to your priest, or walking into your local grief share group for the first time. That is a hard step. And it's just really difficult to make that initial call. Shoot, if you've lost a child, man, we still have space at Smile Again this summer. So call us up. Like we would love to have you. But it's really difficult to take the risk of making that first contact because we all feel so broken and we often draw within. We don't think people are going to understand and it's going to be difficult and we're not sure if we can share it and we don't want to cry. And so we isolate. But I just want to say, man, we weren't created to do this life alone. And if this podcast does anything for you, I hope it nudges you in the direction of taking that risk. Find someone, anyone who you can share your life with, share your heart with, share your grief with. See, I've read quite a few books. I've listened to a lot of podcasts. Some have been helpful, others not so much. But where have I found the deepest healing is not in books or podcasts or internet lectures. Where I have found the deepest healing is with Jill, with Alan, with Eric, with Lauren, with Dave, with others, with friends who have listened, who have walked with me, literally and figuratively, people who I could just be brutally honest with, who I could know and be known by them, whom I could love and receive love from them. And I just want to say there is nothing more important than this, being known, being loved, knowing and loving, and to take that risk to reach out for healing, confessional, deep communities. And I think you'll find this. The first step is the hardest. Once you make that phone call, once you open up the door to deeper relationship, God begins to work to bring about a healing that you cannot find on your own. And so may God bring you relationships that can help bring a little bit of healing to your deeply wounded soul. May God bring peace to you through the people that He's brought into your life. Hey, I just want to say thanks for watching our video. If you could, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, maybe add a comment below. All those things help the algorithms with YouTube. Just trying to get these videos out to more people who are going through difficult times. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.